Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for coming. So yeah, I'm Anna Mahtani in the Department of Philosophy, and my talk's on dementia and decision making. And decision theory is an area that I've worked on for quite a few years, but applying it to dementia is really something new. But when I started looking at the connections, it seemed like such an important area. So I'm going to present some first ideas on it, and I'll be really interested to hear what you think. So let's just start with the question of why we should care about dementia. So one reason to care about dementia is because it's just so prevalent. So anecdotally, when I've told people that I'm working on this topic, so many people have said to me, oh, I've got a relative with dementia, or I've got a friend with dementia. And this, as I have myself. And the statistics bear this out. So this is a recent report calculating your risk of getting dementia, risk for an individual living in the UK. And the lifetime risk is 36.2, so just over a third. So over 1 in 3 chance that you will develop dementia. And then there's the risk of becoming a carer. So maybe a partner to someone who has dementia, for example. And the risk of that is 30.4%. And the way they've calculated it gives them 55% risk of either developing dementia yourself or becoming a carer for someone who has dementia, or both. So it's more likely than not that your own life is going to be really heavily impacted by dementia. A lot of people's lives are. I'm interested actually in why we hear so little about dementia given these figures. And I think it's because, although of course we all know that older people vote, I still don't think we have their voice. We don't hear what they have to say. We don't hear much about what their lives are like. And of course most people who have dementia and most people who are carers for people with dementia are themselves old. Okay, so that's one reason to care about dementia. It's just so prevalent. Another reason is that I think there's an issue of inequality here. So dementia is 20% higher among black adults compared to the UK average. So that's one dimension of inequality. It's also the case, I haven't got the statistics here, it's more of a small scale study, seems to show that dementia incidence is higher in more deprived boroughs of London than less deprived boroughs. It also kills almost double the number of women than men, so women are much more likely to get and die from dementia. Now of course women live longer, right? On average, women have a longer life expectancy. So you might expect them to have the dementia to be higher among women. They've got more elderly life to get dementia in. But actually that doesn't account for this. So even when you take into account that women live longer than men, dementia is still overrepresented in women. And finally, if we think about caring, I think there's definitely an issue of inequality here as well. So caring for people with dementia is this absolutely massive task that our society does. And it's shared out across everybody, but it's not shared equally. So 2/3 of unpaid carers, of course, among paid carers, it's massively skewed towards women. But among unpaid carers, 2/3 are women. And female carers spend more time and are 2.5 times more likely to live with the person they care for. So there's this enormous burden of care being taken on largely by women in our society. I've been speaking, as part of my project, I've been speaking to some of the women who are carers, and one of them said to me, this is going to be feminism's next big issue. This should be feminism's biggest issue now. And I'll be interested to hear what you think about that. Anyway, so this is, I think, why we should care about dementia. And because I'm a decision theorist, of course, I'm interested in decision making. So the question I'm focusing on is who should be making the decisions that affect a person with dementia, and how should those decisions be made? So if you have contact with someone who has dementia, then you'll know there's an awful lot of decisions that have to be made. So I'm thinking about small decisions and big decisions. So small decisions might just be things like what to wear today. Should the person wear the sort of clothes they always wore in the past, or something comfortable and easy to get on? What should they eat? Should they eat vegetarian food, or should they eat meat dishes? Who should they visit? What sort of activities should they have? Should they take part in? So all of those, loads of small decisions to be made every single day. And then also really big decisions. Once someone develops dementia, they might have to make big decisions like, should I have a carer come to my house? Should some of the person's money be spent on that carer? Maybe about moving somewhere else. Should they continue to live in their home, or should they move to a care home or residential home? And about treatment, like should they have life-prolonging treatment, or should they have palliative care? So massive decisions to be made. So I'm thinking about all of these different sorts of decisions. Who should be making those decisions? So I've got some options for us to consider. The most obvious option might be, right, the person with dementia themselves. After all, I've said it's the decisions that affect the person with dementia, so maybe they should be making those decisions, right? We'll explore that option. There's also the person's earlier self. So that would be like us, if we're all pre-dementia, but might develop dementia in the future. That would be like us now making decisions for our future selves. And then of course there's other people who might be making the decisions, family members, friends, professional carers. Okay, so let's go through these options. So we'll start with the person who has dementia. Maybe they're the one who should be making the decisions. So in loads of cases, I think this is absolutely right. So some forms of dementia have an early stage, and in an early stage people can live independently, make their own decisions. They might be just as good at making decisions in general as you or I, and presumably much better than us at making decisions about their own lives. So for lots of situations I think this is the right answer, but the challenging case comes when you have people with more advanced dementia. Because of course one of the things that dementia does is you lose information. You forget things. Information's just available to you sometimes it's missing, it's fragmented. When you're missing information, that could stand in the way of your making a good decision. Now actually, of course, we are all allowed to make decisions when we're missing important information. If I want to, I could spend some of my own money on something without doing any research at all, missing some vital information that would be very useful to me to have. Nobody's going to stop me, right? It's my right to do that if I want. It's my own stupid mistake. So merely missing some information that's relevant, I don't think is a reason to say the person with dementia shouldn't make the decision. But sometimes people with dementia are radically missing information. So, for example, suppose we asked someone with dementia who could no longer walk whether they wanted to spend some of their money on getting themselves a wheelchair so that they could be transported around. If they've forgotten that they can't walk, if they believe they can walk, they might just say no. But they're missing a really important piece of information for making the decision. And it's not possible to just sort of give them that information and then them quickly adjust to that fact and then make a decision, because it can be forgotten again within a minute or so. So in those cases we might think, if you're missing so much information, you can't make a good decision. I think it's also possible for you to be missing so much information that you can't make the decision at all. You haven't even got the concepts that you need to understand the decision. So for example, if you ask somebody with fairly advanced dementia whether they would like the booster vaccine for COVID, then it might be that there's just no way they can make that decision because they can't understand the concepts. They're missing too much information to grasp what the decision is about. And there we might think, well, they can't make the decision at all. It's not possible for them. It's not just that they can't make a good decision, they simply can't make the decision. And lacking capacity, which is this sharp line that the Lord draws, comes in somewhere around here. Okay, so you might think, well, okay, people with dementia can be missing a lot of information, but we should still respect their desires. So we could combine their desires and preferences with the information that we, their carers or family members have to reach a good decision. So this often happens, like if you go to the doctor because you're feeling ill, because you've got some kind of illness, the doctor's the one with the medical knowledge, but they can't necessarily make the decision for you all by themselves because they need to know about your preferences. So they might ask you, would you like to quickly end the pain even if you're then a bit drowsy for a few days? Or would you prefer to stay alert but the pain not be fully controlled? And that's a preference for you to choose between. So your desire will settle that, and then the doctor can combine that with information about medication to arrive at a decision. So we might think in the same way, it should be the person with dementia contributing their preferences to the decision and collaborating with, say, a care worker who can add information to arrive at a sort of collaborative decision. And I think that's quite a good model and what a lot of good carers are trying to do. But there's also a question over whether it is the person's current desires that we should be listening to, because sometimes your desires seem to be altered. Values that you had for your whole life sometimes seem to be different once you've developed dementia. So you can have cases of a person who was vegetarian for their whole lives and felt really strongly about it, and then offered different dishes in a buffet, might reach for the meat dish. And even if you say that's a meat dish, maybe that they don't seem to mind. They don't seem to mind. I mean, I actually think in these sorts of cases, it's because they're radically missing information. I think information is all bound up with desires. There's no sharp separation really between desires and information. But if you think there is, then it looks like people's desires can change when they get dementia. So yeah, they might reach for the meat dish. So if we went with what they seem to desire now, would help them to the meat dish. If we thought instead about the values they'd had throughout their life, then you might distract them, offer a vegetarian dish instead. Similarly, one of the alterations that I think happens to a lot of people, maybe it's something that we all have in common, is that we think, when we're thinking ahead, we think, I don't want to be helpless for a long time. I don't want to be cared for, maybe by my family members for many, many years, while I can't do anything for myself. But once you get there, your desires often seem to be different. Like you're asking for help from your family members all the time. So should we go with the lifelong values that we had, or should we just go with the desires of the person with dementia at that time? Lots of people have the intuition that there's something wrong with just going with the person's current desires and leaving their old values behind. Okay, so let's explore the other option then of having the person's earlier self make the decision. So that would be us now choosing for our future selves. And the first question is how? How can this earlier self make the decision? I mean, once you've got dementia, the earlier self isn't there anymore to make the decision. So how can they be making it? But there are a couple of ways that you can. So you can bind yourself. For example, now you could write an advance directive about what you want to happen to you. And there's all sorts of ways of making decisions that have long-term consequences for yourself. So you could make some of those decisions at the earlier time. But I also think family, friends and professionals are crucial here. So the reality is that it's not usually the person with dementia or the person's earlier self making all the decisions is going to be working with family, friends and professional carers. And they can, if they want to, try to fit with the desires of the person who's got dementia now or with the desires of the person's earlier self. And I've grouped these together because I think one way that the person's earlier self can make the decisions, in a sense, is by family members, friends and carers trying to choose what the person would have wanted before they had dementia. What would they have chosen to happen to me now? Okay, so let's explore the idea of the earlier self making the decisions. So in one way, of course, the earlier self has more information than the person with dementia, because when you develop dementia, you forget things, you lose information. The earlier self hasn't lost that information, but they are missing some other information, right? They don't know, for example, what it's like to have dementia. They don't know what the situation's going to be. They don't know what the experience is going to be like. So I've split this missing information into two sorts. Philosophers sometimes think that what it's like information about an experience, is something you can't get without having that experience. You've got to actually go through the experience of eating Marmite to find out what it's like to eat Marmite. You can't learn it any other way. And so it might be that it's impossible for us to get this information in advance. But I think there's a whole load of ordinary facts about dementia that most people are missing, but that we could tool ourselves up to have. So for example, there's just a lot of misconceptions, right? People might think as soon as you develop dementia, you can no longer live independently and you need to go into a care home. That's not the case. There's lots of different types of dementia. Some of them have an early phase. There might be a long phase where you're living independently. People might not know about the support that's available, and they might not know what people are generally seen to be experiencing when they have dementia. So of course, people who have dementia sometimes seem to be experiencing a lot of distress. But they also, some people with dementia seem to be enjoying themselves. So all of that information needs to be given to the person at the earlier stage in order to make a good decision. And that's what I think should be happening. So as to who should make decisions that affect a person with dementia, I'm inclined at the moment to think it should be the person's earlier self, but conditionalized on realistic scenarios. So you know what's likely to happen when you've got dementia, and then you can make a plan for that. And you've educated yourself about what having dementia involves so that you can make the right decisions. Like you won't decide that you definitely don't want to live any longer once you develop dementia if you find out that there can be a phase where you might enjoy your life and be living independently. So yeah, I think friends, family and carers who are realistically often the ones making the decisions or helping make the decisions, they could be trying to act as the earlier self, conditionalized on what's actually happening, the realistic scenario would have wanted. Okay, so just before I finish, just something on the upshot. So I think there's a massive upshot to this topic. So one is about things that are happening now. So all over the country, people are making all of these decisions. The people making the decisions are just ordinary people who've ended up caring for their spouse, or their family member, or their care workers working on the front line making these decisions. And the sorts of questions that they're grappling with are how much weight should be given to advanced care plans, where an earlier self has said what they want. How much weight should be given to those versus what the person now seems to want? And what values should the carers focus on? Should they focus on the person's earlier values or what they currently seem to value? I also think there's an upshot for us, right, as people who might develop dementia in the future. If you want your earlier self to make the decisions about what's going to happen, I think there's a call for making advanced decisions which are these legally binding documents, or at least, you know, statements of wishes. It's really low, the levels in this country of people making these advanced directives. And I think I'd be really interested in finding out whether we could have some sort of movement. I'm turning this into a manifesto now, but LSE academics making these advanced directives. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks.